with the Coopville Wharf in Coopville because we'd come and tied up for like a couple of days when I was a kid, and there was a painter in Coopville that painted the wharf with the tugboat there. So we have that painting. But in the 19th century, I'm a living history interpreter. I interpret at Forts Nisqually and Steilacoom down in Pierce County. And in the 19th century, people call me O-Pouts. O-Pouts. So think of it as like O as in oh my, and then pouts, like somebody pouts, right? O-Pouts. O-Pouts is a Chinook word. So it's a Native American word from what is now Washington State, and it means rudder, as in the rudder of a boat, right? So that's what my name means, and I'm portraying a 19th century sailor, mid 19th century. So what you see me wearing is what a U.S. naval sailor of the mid 19th century would have worn, at least standard issue from, well, here to here. This garment that I'm wearing is actually an exact reproduction of a U.S. Navy sailor's frock from the mid-19th century. So this is basically an enlisted man's uniform in the American Navy at that time. So we're talking about 1830s to 1850s. Actually, this uniform stayed the standard American naval uniform into the Civil War, and then it changed slightly. What happened was the collar got swept back, and it actually became the little mini cape that you see on sailors' jumpers today. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of see how this evolved into the modern Navy jumper of today. So the hat that I'm wearing is not a standard naval issue hat. Standard naval issue hat, mid-19th century, would have been what was called a tarpaulin hat. It was basically a hat that was this shape, but it was made of canvas, and it was coated with tar so that it would be waterproof. Herman Melville, same guy who wrote Moby Dick, wrote in another book, the tarpaulin hat was stiff enough that you could sit on it when it was first made. It was brand new. Now, I've dreamed of having a tarpaulin hat made, but the problem with having a tarpaulin hat in the summer is it feels like your head is stuck in an oven, right? Feel free. Sorry. Or you could stay.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Oh, I'm a living history interpreter.
Cool.
And so I'm here today as a guest of the Whidbey Island Historical Association and Museum, which is right up there. Oh, and by the way, folks, before I forget, there's a donation box, and all donations go to the museum. I don't take a single cent. So please consider giving to the museum. So I'm portraying a U.S. Navy sailor from well, in this case, the year is 1850. Okay. So because of the fact that tarpaulin hats, the canvas hats that were coated in tar, were so incredibly hot, sailors would usually buy their own straw hats, and then they would rig up ribbons to tie them on, like you see with this one. Okay, so that was very, very common. The shoes I'm wearing are basically the kind of shoes that sailors would have worn at that time. Pants, however, these are civilian pants. They're not the standard issue naval trousers that you get. So the standard issue naval trousers would have had this little kind of bib that would have come up and buttoned on right here, and they'd be bell-bottomed at the bottom, and that's so you could roll up the pant leg, so that you could do things like swabbing the deck and stuff like that. So, okay, I'm portraying an American Navy sailor from 1850, but I'm wearing civilian pants. Well, actually, that is accurate, because the U.S. Navy on the West Coast had what we would now call a really severe supply chain problem. They had huge trouble getting supplies from the East Coast because they had to go around Cape Horn. and out to the west coast. So the records I found from the era indicate that they had some sailors' clothing, but not anywhere near enough for the number of sailors. So you would have seen sailors in this area in the early 1850s. Some of them would have been indistinguishable from either merchant sailors or even people on land in terms of what they were wearing. But I did have the frock here because I thought it was cool. My boat, the boat that you see behind me here, which I still have to fully adjust. But the boat that you see here is an exact replica based on plans from the Smithsonian of a U.S. Navy cutter from the 1850s. So that's what a small boat would have looked like in the year 1850. Right? This particular boat is 16 feet long. She's about 4.5 feet wide. She was built by the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op in, well, Port Townsend. And I used to live in Port Townsend, so I actually helped them build the boat. Every step of the way. From laying out the design on the floor to completing the finishing, sanding, and painting. And so a boat like this would have, well, in the 1850s in this area, you could have seen a boat like this doing a number of things. They could have either been slung on davits at the back of a large ship. So to go into the water, to either go from ship to ship or ship to shore. You could have seen them tied up in a creek, just to shuttle people back and forth on the Sound, because water was how people traveled back then, right? Or, you could have seen them doing any number of things, working, fishing, whatever. This is a very, very typical boat from the era. She's built of Western red cedar. She's built of, the planks are Western red cedar. The ribs are white oak. And the dark hardwood is either mahogany or Philippine mahogany. But now here's something I'm really proud of in the 21st century. Because of the fact that the Shipwrights Co-op, they deal with so many large boats and ships and stuff, they had a lot of short ends, like little pieces of wood. Well, actually, they weren't that little, but they had these pieces that were left over from larger boats and ships. So I don't think a single tree was cut down to build this boat. She was made from short ends from larger projects. So I'm proud of it. So why the year 1850? Well, on May 13th, 1850, the USS Massachusetts entered Penn Cove. She basically came right in here and she anchored right about where that boat is anchored out there today. And she sent parties ashore, and she was the first American steamship on Puget Sound. I've always been interested in steam my entire life, and so this is my, a friend of mine called it my steamboat project without steam. Because she doesn't have a steam engine, but the ship's boats wouldn't have at that time. Steam was basically reserved for the large ships, and it wasn't until later in the 1800s that they started making small launches that had little steam engines. Right? So you could have seen this boat right here 170 years ago. So what was the Massachusetts doing here? She was doing a military survey. They were trying to find locations for forts and naval yards and supplies for the Navy on the Pacific coast. Because keep in mind, the boundary between Canada and the U.S. had just been set 4 years earlier in 1846, and the Mexican-American War had just resulted in California becoming part of the Union in 1848. So the final thing I'll say just in this introduction that I'm giving here is the boat's name is Boat. Boat. So you pronounce it like the word poke, in English, but with a B. Boat. Sort of. It's a Lachute seed word, a Native American word, and from this area, and what it means is duck, as in the bird. So the story is that my sailor character, he encounters a young Native American woman, and she points at this vessel, and he says, "It's my boat." But she thinks he says boat. Duck. And so that's the basic story of what I'm doing here and what this boat is doing. Wait, one last thing. If you were able to come to a presentation that I did here on May 11th, you know that O'Pouts, when he was very young, came as a cabin boy on the first American ship that was ever on Puget Sound, called the Guatemosin. She was a fur trading vessel that arrived right here, same place, in 1803.